The basement of the Bridgewater Historical Society smelled of dust and aging paper. Rain pattered against the small windows near the ceiling, casting weak afternoon light across the sprawling shelves of archived materials. Emma Harlow had been working here for 3 months now, cataloging and digitizing the Society's extensive collection of photographs from the late 1800s. "You'll want these," said Walter, the elderly archivist, placing a cardboard box on her desk. "Just came in from the Morningside Estate donation. Apparently they found these in a sealed trunk in the attic." Emma nodded appreciatively. At 32, she'd left her position at Boston University's Library Science Department to take this temporary job in rural Massachusetts. A divorce and her mother's declining health had brought her back to her hometown. The quiet work suited her methodical, solitary, allowing her mind to focus on something other than her unraveling life. The box contained several leather-bound albums and loose photographs. Most were the typical stiff portraits of the Irisalem families in their Sunday best, children positioned like miniature adults, no one smiling. Emma carefully scanned each one, creating digital records with whatever identifying information was available. Near the bottom of the box, she found a large photograph mounted on heavyweight cardboard. It showed a Victorian brick building with Bridgewater Children's Home engraved on a stone above the entrance. On the front steps stood 2 adults, a stern-looking woman in a high-necked dress and a balding man in clerical attire, flanked by 12 children of varying ages. Emma turned it over. Someone had written in faded ink, "Bridgewater Orphanage, Spring 1886. Reverend William Thorne and Matron Agnes Pembroke with children." Something about the photo made Emma pause. The children's expressions ranged from blank to fearful, except for one girl standing slightly apart from the others. She appeared to be about 10 years old, wearing a white dress that seemed a shade brighter than the others. Unlike the rest, she was smiling, not broadly, but with a subtle curve of her lips that seemed almost knowing. "Walter," Emma called, "do we have any records from the old orphanage?" "Should be in section C, shelves 14 through 16, he replied without looking up from his inventory sheets. "The place closed down around 1910, if I remember correctly. Fire or something." Emma spent the next hour locating and pulling the relevant materials ledgers, admission records, annual reports. She found the register covering 1886 and carefully turned the brittle pages until she reached spring of that year. The record showed 11 children in residence during April 1886, when the photograph was likely taken. Emma counted the children in the photo again. 12. She cross-referenced names, ages, and descriptions. Each child in the register could be matched to a face in the photograph, except for the smiling girl in white. The rain grew heavier outside, drumming against the windows as Emma's pulse quickened. She told herself there had to be a logical explanation. Perhaps a girl was a visitor or a new arrival not yet registered, but as she continued checking records before and after that date, she found no mention of any child matching the girl's description. The overhead lights flickered briefly, casting momentary shadows across the basement archives. Emma glanced at her phone, 5:47 p.m. She hadn't realized how late it had gotten. "I'm heading out, Emma," Walter called, pulling on his raincoat. "Don't stay too much longer. The storm's supposed to get worse." "I'll just finish up with this," she replied, eyes still fixed on the photograph. After Walter left, Emma scanned the photograph at high resolution and enlarged the image on her computer screen. The smiling girl's face became clearer. There was something unsettling about her eyes. They seemed to look directly at the camera with an awareness that the other children lacked. Emma scrolled through the orphanage's death records, wondering if perhaps the girl had died shortly after the photo was taken. Nothing matched. According to every official record, the girl in white had never existed at the Bridgewater Children's Home. As she gathered her things to leave, Emma felt a sudden chill in the basement. The lights flickered again, longer this time. She quickly saved her work and shut down the computer, unable to shake the feeling that she was no longer alone among the dusty archives. Emma couldn't stop thinking about the photograph. The next morning she arrived at the Historical Society earlier than usual, determined to solve the mystery of the 12th child. She started by researching the Bridgewater Children's Home itself, founded in 1872 by Reverend William Thorne and his wife. The orphanage had housed over 300 children during its 38 years of operation. In 1910, a fire had destroyed much of the main building, killing Reverend Thorne and 3 children. The orphanage never reopened. "Obsessing over that photo, I see," Walter remarked, placing a cup of coffee on her desk. His eyes crinkled with amusement behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Something's not right about it," Emma replied. "The records are meticulous. Every child who entered or left was documented. But this girl," she pointed to the screen, "she's nowhere in the books." Walter leaned closer, squinting at the image. "Huh. That is strange. Maybe the records were incomplete? I checked multiple sources. The monthly reports to the Board of Trustees list 11 children. The town census from May 1886 shows the same 11. Even the grocery delivery receipts account for feeding 13 people, 11 children, and 2 staff. Could be a relative of one of the staff? Or maybe she was adopted that same day. Emma shook her head. I thought of that. But adoptions were recorded in detail, and there were none that month. And Reverend Thorne and Matron Pembroke had no children or young relatives according to their personal records. Walter straightened up, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. You know who might have some insight? Margaret Simmons. She's 93 now, lives at Oakwood Assisted Living. Her grandmother worked at the orphanage as a cook in the late 1800s. Margaret used to volunteer here years ago and would tell stories about the place. Emma felt a spark of excitement. Do you think she'd talk to me? I can call and ask. Margaret loves visitors. Fair warning, though, her memory comes and goes these days. By early afternoon, Emma was sitting in the sunlit common room at Oakwood Assisted Living, across from a frail but alert elderly woman with carefully styled white hair. It's so kind of you to visit, Margaret said, her thin hands wrapped around a teacup. Walter mentioned you found a photograph? Emma showed her a print of the scanned image. Margaret adjusted her glasses and studied it with surprising intensity. My grandmother Hannah worked there from 1879 to 1896, she said finally. She never liked talking about the place much. Said it was a sad house even before the fire. Did she ever mention anything unusual? About the children or the staff? Margaret's eyes remained fixed on the photograph. She said Reverend Thorne was strict but fair. It was his wife people worried about. His wife? Emma frowned. The records list Agnes Pembroke as the matron. Yes, that was after. His first wife, Eleanor, died suddenly in 1885. Grandmother said there was talk in town, nothing concrete, just whispers. Eleanor had been responsible for caring for the youngest children, and she was overly stern with them. Margaret's voice dropped. Grandmother once let slip that a little girl had died while being punished, though it was recorded as illness. Emma felt a chill despite the warm room. When was this? Early 1885, I believe. Not long before Eleanor herself passed. After that, Reverend Thorne brought in Agnes Pembroke to take over as matron. Emma pointed to the smiling girl in the photograph. Do you recognize her at all? Margaret leaned closer, then slowly shook her head. No, I don't believe so, but she hesitated. There was something my grandmother mentioned once when I was very young, about the orphanage being haunted. Children would talk about seeing a girl in white who wasn't really there. Grandmother said the staff dismissed it as imagination, but the stories persisted for years. As they continued talking, Emma learned that Margaret's grandmother had kept a journal during her time at the orphanage. After Hannah's death, the journal had passed to Margaret, who thought she still had it packed away somewhere in her apartment. I'd need time to look for it, Margaret said apologetically. Everything got boxed up when I moved here 5 years ago. Could I come back in a few days? Emma asked. That journal might help solve this mystery. Margaret agreed, and as Emma was leaving, the elderly woman caught her arm. Be careful with this, she said, her eyes suddenly sharp and lucid. Grandmother always said some things are better left alone. She left the orphanage after having terrible nightmares for months. Said she kept seeing a girl in white standing at the foot of her bed, pointing at something. Outside, as Emma walked to her car, the sunny afternoon suddenly seemed less bright. Her phone buzzed with a text from Walter. Found something interesting in the newspaper archives. Come back when you can. The mystery of the 12th child was just beginning to unfold. Walter was waiting for Emma when she returned to the Historical Society, holding several photocopied newspaper clippings. I dug through our archive of the Bridgewater Gazette, he said, spreading the yellowed papers across her desk. Look at this obituary from February 1885. The small notice announced the death of Eleanor Thorne, beloved wife of Reverend William Thorne, after a brief illness. A line at the bottom requested donations to the orphanage in lieu of flowers. And this, Walter continued, pointing to another clipping from 3 weeks earlier. It was barely a paragraph, reporting the unfortunate passing of orphan Sarah Collins, age 10, from pneumonia at the Bridgewater Children's Home. Sarah Collins, Emma repeated, writing down the name. And she died just weeks before Eleanor Thorne. There's more. Walter handed her another clipping, dated 1 week after Sarah's death. It detailed a complaint filed by a local doctor who had been called to the orphanage too late to help the child. He expressed concern about the delay in seeking medical attention and the child's unusual bruising. The complaint was dismissed, Walter explained. Reverend Thorne was well respected in the community. But look at this photograph from the town's Founders' Day. Celebration in 1884. The group photos showed Bridgewater's prominent citizens gathered in the town square. Emma immediately spotted Reverend Thorne and his wife. Standing slightly behind them was a girl in a white dress, the same girl from the orphanage photograph. That's Sarah Collins, Walter said quietly. I found her admission record from 1883. Parents died in a factory accident in Boston. She was transferred here from an overcrowded city orphanage. Emma stared at the photo. The girl's expression was solemn here, not smiling as in the later photograph, but it was unmistakably the same child. So she died in January 1885, Emma said slowly, but appears in a photograph taken in spring 1886, over a year after her death. Walter nodded grimly. I can't explain it, but there's something else you should know. After the orphanage burned down in 1910, there were rumors that the fire wasn't accidental. Nothing was ever proven, but ... double quotes, but what? The 3 children who died in the fire? They were found in a locked room in the basement, a room that wasn't on any of the building plans. Emma spent the rest of the day digging deeper into Sarah Collins' short life. The admission records noted she was bright but troublesome, with multiple notations for insubordination and telling tales. One entry, written in Eleanor Thorne's precise handwriting, stated, Sarah continues to make unfounded accusations against staff. Its punishment does not correct her fabrications. That evening, Emma drove to her mother's nursing home for her weekly visit. Claire Harlow's Alzheimer's had progressed rapidly over the past year, and she rarely recognized her daughter anymore. Today was no different. Emma sat beside her mother's bed, holding her hand and talking softly about everyday things, carefully avoiding any mention of the unsettling photograph. As Emma was preparing to leave, her mother suddenly gripped her hand with surprising strength. The girl in white, Claire whispered, her eyes briefly clear and focused. She stands in the corner at night. Emma froze. What did you say, Mom? But the moment of lucidity had passed. Claire's gaze drifted back to the window, her thoughts once again unreachable. The drive home took Emma past the site where the orphanage had once stood. Now it was an empty lot, overgrown with weeds and surrounded by a chain-link fence. The property had changed hands multiple times over the decades, but no development plans had ever been completed. Local rumors suggested the land was cursed. Emma pulled over and parked across the street, staring at the vacant lot in the gathering dusk. Something white fluttered at the edge of her vision, probably just a plastic bag caught in the fence. But for a moment it had looked like the hem of a dress. Her phone rang, startling her. It was the assisted living facility. Margaret Simmons had found her grandmother's journal and was eager for Emma to see it. Can you come tomorrow? The nurse asked. Miss Simmons is quite insistent, Emma agreed, trying to ignore the growing sense of dread that had settled in her stomach. As she drove away, she glanced in her rearview mirror. The empty lot was dark now, revealing nothing. But later that night, as she sorted through the digital copies of the orphanage records, Emma discovered something that made her blood run cold. In the margin of the April 1886 monthly report, someone had written a single sentence in faint pencil. She stands at the foot of my bed again, pointing to the basement. The handwriting matched Agnes Pembroke's. The next morning, Emma arrived at Oakwood Assisted Living to find Margaret Simmons sitting in her wheelchair by the window, a worn, leather-bound book in her lap. The elderly woman looked more frail than she had just days before, her skin pallid against her blue sweater. I found it, Margaret said without preamble. Grandmother's journal. I read some of it last night. Her hands trembled as she handed the book to Emma. I'd forgotten how troubled she was about that place. Emma carefully opened the journal. Hannah Simmons had kept meticulous daily entries, mostly about mundane matters. Menus planned, supplies ordered, weather observations. But beginning in January 1885, the entries became more disturbing. January 12th, 1885. The Collinses' girl died yesterday. Mrs. Thorne says it was pneumonia, but Dr. Winters seemed doubtful. The poor child had been confined to the cellar room for 2 days as punishment for lying. She'd claimed Mrs. Thorne held her head under water during bathing. I heard the child's coughing from the kitchen, but was forbidden to bring her food or medicine. January 20th, 1885. Mrs. Thorne is acting strangely. Says she keeps seeing Sarah in the hallways. Reverend Thorne suggested she rests more. February 3rd, 1885. Found Mrs. Thorne in the kitchen at 3 a.m. staring at nothing. When I asked if she needed help, she said she won't stop pointing at the basement. Mrs. T is taken to sleeping with a lamp burning. February 9th, 1885. Mrs. Thorne dead this morning. They're saying heart failure. Reverend Thorne found her in the cellar room, though no one can explain why she went there in the night. Her face was fixed in an expression of terror. Emma looked up at Margaret, who was watching her intently. Keep reading, the old woman urged. It gets worse. The entries continued through 1885, describing how Reverend Thorne became withdrawn after his wife's death, spending long hours in his study with the door locked. Agnes Pembroke arrived in March to take over the matron duties. By all accounts, she was kind to the children, but within months, She too began complaining of strange occurrences. April 30th, 1886. Miss Pembroke asked if I ever see the girl in white. When I said no, she showed me the photograph taken last week. It says there's a 12th child in it, a girl who looks like Sarah Collins. I told her that's impossible as Sarah died last year. Miss P became quite upset and said, then why is she in the photograph and why does she stand in my room at night? May 15th, 1886. 3 of the children now claim to see Sarah. They say she walks the hallways after dark, always pointing toward the basement. Miss Pembroke has asked Reverend Thorne to call in a minister from Boston to bless the house, but he refuses to acknowledge anything is wrong. Emma turned the page to find several pressed flowers and a small yellowed newspaper clipping. It was an article from August 1886, reporting that Agnes Pembroke had resigned her position at the orphanage after suffering nervous exhaustion. Her replacement was a widow named Harriet Dowd. September 2nd, 1886. Mrs. Dowd had the cellar room cleared out today. Said it was unsanitary and unnecessary to lock children in a dark room as punishment. She found scratch marks on the inside of the door and a child's shoe that no one could identify. Reverend Thorne was furious when he found out, shouting that she had no authority to change his methods. I've never seen him so enraged. The entries continued for several more years, with Hannah noting increasing tensions between Reverend Thorne and the staff, as well as continued sightings of the girl in white. The final entry was dated June 14th, 1896. I cannot stay in this place any longer. Last night I saw her clearly, Sarah, standing at the foot of my bed, her white dress glowing in the darkness. She said nothing but pointed toward the floor with such urgency that I felt compelled to follow. She led me to the basement, to the wall beside the coal chute. There is something there, something hidden, but I cannot bear to discover what it is. I have given my notice. May God forgive me for not helping that child when she lived. Emma closed the journal, her hands shaking slightly. Did your grandmother ever tell you what she thought was hidden in the basement? Margaret shook her head. She would never speak of it directly. But once, when I was about 12, I overheard her talking to my mother. She said it wasn't just Sarah, there were others who disappeared without record, and he buried the evidence in the walls. Reverend Thorne, Emma whispered. My grandmother believed he killed Sarah during one of his punishments, and his wife knew about it, or perhaps even helped. Then Eleanor started seeing Sarah's ghost, and either killed herself out of guilt, or was killed by her husband to keep her quiet. Emma thought about the newspaper clippings, the mysterious 12th child in the photograph, and the room in the basement where 3 children later died in the fire. A terrible picture was forming. What happened to Reverend Thorne after your grandmother left? She asked. He ran the orphanage until the fire in 1910. By then, he was known for his extreme disciplinary methods. There had been several investigations, but nothing was ever proven. After his death, no evidence was found of any wrongdoing, because it was buried in the walls, Emma said, and the fire destroyed the evidence. Margaret nodded slowly. That's what grandmother believed. She carried that guilt to her grave, that she left without exposing him, and more children suffered. As Emma prepared to leave, Margaret held onto her arm with surprising strength. Be careful, she warned. Grandmother said some spirits cannot rest until justice is done. If you've noticed Sarah's presence, it means she's chosen you to uncover the truth. Outside, the autumn day had turned gray and cold. Emma sat in her car, staring at the digital copy of the orphanage photograph on her phone. The girl in white, Sarah, seemed to look directly at her across the decades, her smile no longer mysterious but pleading. Emma started her car and drove toward the vacant lot where the orphanage had once stood. It was time to see what remained of the Bridgewater Children's Home's foundation, and what might still be hidden beneath it. The vacant lot looked even more forbidding in the pale afternoon light. Emma parked across the street and surveyed the property through her car window. The chain-link fence was rusty and sagging in places, with no trespassing signs posted at intervals. Beyond it, tall weeds and scrubby trees had reclaimed what had once been the orphanage grounds. She took a deep breath and dialed the number on her phone. Bridgewater Building Department, a bored voice answered. Hi, I'm calling from the Historical Society, Emma said, injecting confidence into her voice. I'm researching the old Bridgewater Orphanage property on Elm Street. I was wondering if there have been any recent surveys or excavations done. We're putting together an exhibit on historical buildings. The clerk seemed eager for the distraction. After several minutes of conversation, Emma learned that the most recent survey had been conducted just last year, when a developer had considered building apartments on the site. They abandoned the plans pretty quick, the clerk said. Something about unstable foundation elements making construction costs prohibitive. I can email you the survey report if you want. That would be extremely helpful, Emma replied, providing her email address. While waiting for the report, she circled the property on foot, studying the overgrown terrain through gaps in the fence. At the far corner, partially hidden by a cluster of sumac trees, she spotted what appeared to be concrete steps leading downward, perhaps to a former basement entrance. Her phone chimed with the incoming email. The survey report was detailed, including ground-penetrating radar images of the remaining foundation structure. According to the diagrams, substantial portions of the basement level remained intact. Despite the fire and subsequent partial demolition in 1911, Emma's attention was drawn to a notation on the survey. Map: anomalous enclosed space adjacent to main basement, not on original building plans. Possible coal storage. The location matched where Hannah Simmons had described following Sarah's ghost near the coal chute. By now, the daylight was beginning to fade. Emma knew she should leave and return with proper equipment and perhaps local authorities. But something compelled her to get a closer look at those basement steps before departing. She found a section of fence where the bottom had pulled away from the ground, creating a gap just large enough to squeeze through. The tall weeds scratched at her jeans as she made her way toward the concrete steps. Up close, she could see they descended about 8 feet to a rusted metal door, partially blocked by fallen debris. The door was padlocked, but the hasp had nearly rusted through. Emma took out her phone and switched on its flashlight, illuminating the stairwell. Something white caught her attention, a small piece of fabric snagged on a protruding nail near the bottom step. She carefully made her way down and examined it. The fabric appeared to be old, possibly cotton, and despite being filthy with dust and rust stains, had an underlying whiteness, like a piece of a child's dress. A sudden gust of wind blew down the stairwell, carrying a whisper so faint Emma wasn't sure she'd actually heard it. "Help us." Her heart pounding, she climbed back up to ground level. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the lot. She took several photos of the stairwell and the survey diagrams on her phone, then reluctantly made her way back to the fence. As she was about to duck through the gap, movement in her peripheral vision made her turn. For just a moment, she thought she saw a small figure in white standing by the basement steps. But when she looked directly at the spot, nothing was there except the gathering darkness. That evening, Emma reviewed everything she had learned while creating a timeline of events. Sarah Collins had died in January 1885, supposedly from pneumonia, but with suspicious circumstances. Eleanor Thorne died a few weeks later. By April 1886, Sarah's ghost had appeared in a photograph and was being seen by staff and children alike. Emma searched online for any information about Reverend William Thorne. Most sources described him as a stern but dedicated caretaker of orphan children. However, she found a doctoral thesis from 1998 examining childcare institutions in 19th century New England, which painted a darker picture. According to the thesis, several children had disappeared from the Bridgewater Orphanage's records over the years with no documentation of transfers or adoptions. The author had attributed this to poor record-keeping, but in light of what Emma now knew, it suggested something far more sinister. She opened her photo editing software and enhanced the image of Sarah Collins in the orphanage photograph. The girl's eyes seemed to hold a profound sadness beneath the enigmatic smile. She was pointing subtly, with just one finger extended downward, but definitely pointing. Emma's phone rang, startling her. It was Walter. "Emma, you need to see this," he said without greeting. "I was organizing the materials you've been working with, and I found something taped to the back of that orphanage photograph. It looks like a small key." "A key?" Emma sat up straighter. "What kind of key?" "Old, that's for sure. Small, maybe for a cabinet or lockbox. I've put it in the safe for you to examine tomorrow." After hanging up, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was running out of time. The discovery of Sarah Collins in the photograph had set something in motion, something that had been waiting for over a century. She returned to the survey report, studying the basement layout carefully. The anomalous enclosed space was approximately 8 feet by 6 feet, large enough to hold several small bodies, or perhaps evidence of what had really happened to the missing children. As she finally prepared for bed, Emma placed the printed copy of the orphanage photograph on her nightstand. Just before turning out the light, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. In the window of the orphanage, barely visible in the background, was the faint outline of a face watching the group from inside. A woman's face, contorted in what appeared to be terror. Emma turned the light back on and grabbed her magnifying glass. The face was indistinct but unmistakably there. Eleanor Thorne had died months before the photograph was taken, but something of her remained in that house, visible only when you knew where to look. She fell into an uneasy sleep, dreaming of children whispering behind walls and a small hand reaching out from the darkness, beckoning her forward. Emma arrived at the Historical Society early the next morning, eager to examine the key Walter had found. She had slept poorly, her dreams filled with images of Sarah Collins and whispered pleas for help. Walter was already there, carefully cleaning a microscope lens. "Morning," he greeted her. "You look terrible, if you don't mind my saying so." "Thanks," Emma replied dryly. "Didn't sleep well, is that the key?" He nodded toward a small box on her desk. Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, was a tarnished brass key about 2 inches long. Its bow was ornately decorated with a floral pattern, and the bit had an unusual configuration. "It's a cabinet key," Walter said, peering over her shoulder. "Late 19th century, probably. I've been wondering why someone would tape it to the back of that photograph." Emma carefully picked it up. Quote, "Not just any photograph, a photograph showing a dead girl who shouldn't be there. And now a hidden key. What are you thinking?" Walter asked, his expression concerned. "I think Sarah Collins is trying to tell us something. I think she has been for over 100 years. Emma explained her findings about the orphanage basement and the suspicious circumstances surrounding Sarah's death. Walter listened intently, his forehead creasing deeper with each detail. When she finished, he removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "Emma, this sounds... well, it sounds crazy. Ghost children and photographs? Secret rooms with bodies in the walls? It's like something from a horror novel." "I know how it sounds," she admitted, "but the evidence is there. Children disappeared from that orphanage without explanation. Sarah Collins died under suspicious circumstances and then appeared in a photograph taken after her death. Something terrible happened in that place, Walter, and I think this key might help uncover what it was." "What does the key open, though?" "The orphanage burned down over a century ago." Emma considered this. "Not completely. The basement structure is still there under all that overgrowth. But you're right, any wooden cabinets or doors would have been destroyed in the fire. Unless ... double quotes, Walter's eyes widened slightly. "Unless something was removed from the orphanage before the fire. Something important enough to hide, but also to preserve." Emma's mind raced. The records showed that after Reverend Thorne died in the fire, his personal effects were claimed by his nephew, Edward Thorne. "Do we have any information on what happened to the Thorne family?" Walter thought for a moment. "Not much. Edward Thorne lived in Providence, Rhode Island, if I recall correctly. He came to collect his uncle's belongings and settle the estate. I don't think he ever returned to Bridgewater." A quick internet search revealed that Edward Thorne had been a successful banker who died in 1942. His only daughter, Catherine, had married a man named James Morningside in 1938. "Morningside," Emma repeated. "The Morningside estate donation, that's where the orphanage photograph came from." Walter nodded slowly. "So whatever this key opens might still be at the Morningside estate. But that property was sold last year after Catherine Morningside died. Her great-grandson donated a lot of the historical items to us. We need to contact him," Emma said decisively. "See if there's anything else from the orphanage that might have been kept." While Walter made the calls, Emma examined the key more closely under the microscope. There was an inscription on the bow, nearly worn away with age. "Private." Walter returned an hour later with news. "I reached Andrew Morningside. He says there was an old trunk that belonged to Reverend Thorne that the family never opened. Catherine always insisted it remain locked. When they cleared out the estate, Andrew kept it in storage, thinking it might have historical value. Did he say why they never opened it? Family superstition, apparently. Catherine claimed the trunk was cursed, said she heard children crying whenever she went near it. The family just left it alone out of respect for her wishes." By early afternoon, Emma was following Walter's car along winding country roads toward a storage facility outside of town. Andrew Morningside had agreed to meet them there and seemed relieved that someone was finally taking an interest in the old trunk. Andrew was a tall man in his 50s with prematurely white hair and a nervous manner. He greeted them in front of his storage unit. "It's a bit of a family legend, this trunk," he explained as he unlocked the padlock. Great-grandmother Catherine was usually quite rational, but she was absolutely adamant that no one should open it. Said her father had warned her that it contained evidence of sins best left buried. The storage unit contained furniture draped in dust covers and stacked boxes. In the far corner stood a large leather trunk reinforced with brass fittings. It had a prominent lock on the front. "That's it," Andrew said, gesturing toward the trunk. "I've never tried to open it. To be honest, I've always felt a bit uneasy around it." Emma approached the trunk slowly, aware of a growing heaviness in the air. The key seemed to grow warm in her palm as she knelt before the lock. It fit perfectly. She glanced at Walter and Andrew, who both nodded encouragingly. With a deep breath, she turned the key. The lock mechanism clicked, and the hasp sprang open. The trunk's heavy lid creaked as Emma lifted it. Inside lay several leather-bound ledgers, a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon, a wooden box, and a small leather case. Resting on top was a folded piece of paper that had yellowed with age. Emma carefully unfolded it. The handwriting was shaky but legible. To whoever opens this trunk, herein lies the evidence of my grievous sins. I cannot destroy these records, for to do so would compound my wickedness by erasing all trace of those innocent souls lost under my care. Yet I am too cowardly to face justice in this life. The fire that claimed me was no accident, but an act of divine retribution. I welcome the flames, but they have not freed me from my torment. She still stands at the foot of my bed each night, pointing an accusing finger, and now the others join her, their silent faces watching me from the darkness. May God have mercy on my corrupted soul. William Thorne, April 12, 1910, written 1 month before the fire. Emma handed the confession to Walter, whose face had gone pale. With trembling hands, she opened the first ledger. It contained names, dates, and clinical descriptions of punishments administered to children at the orphanage. Sarah Collins appeared frequently in the entries, described as obstinate and dangerous to moral order. The final entry for Sarah, dated January 11, 1885, read simply, "Discipline resulted in unfortunate expiration of subject. Buried in special repository with others. Eleanor distraught. Must watch her carefully." The wooden box contained several small items: a child's shoe, locks of hair tied with thread and labeled with initials, and a tarnished locket containing a tiny portrait of a young girl, Sarah Collins. Emma looked up at Walter and Andrew, who were watching her with horror-struck expressions. "He killed them," she whispered, "multiple children, and hid their remains in a secret room in the basement." The leather case contained a hand-drawn map of the orphanage basement, with the special repository clearly marked exactly where the survey had noted the anomalous enclosed space. As Emma spread the contents of the trunk on the concrete floor of the storage unit, a sudden cold draft swept through the space. The overhead light flickered briefly, and in that moment of semi-darkness, Emma could have sworn she saw a small figure standing in the corner, a girl in a white dress, watching them with solemn eyes. When the light stabilized, there was nothing there, but Emma felt certain they were not alone. "We need to take this to the police," Walter said firmly, gathering the ledgers. "This is evidence of historical crimes." Andrew Morningside had backed away from the trunk, his face ashen. "I always knew there was something wrong with that thing. All those years my family kept it locked away, ... They must have suspected." "I don't think they knew the specifics," Emma said gently. "But yes, I think they sensed something terrible was connected to it, as they carefully packed the items to transport them." Emma noticed something else at the bottom of the trunk, a small leather-bound book with no title. Inside were pages of Reverend Thorne's private thoughts, revealing a man descending into paranoia and guilt. May 18, 1886. The photograph reveals what I feared. She is still here, watching. Agnes saw her in the developed image and became hysterical. I told her it was a flaw in the plate, but she knows better. They all know better. June 30th, 1886. 3 more children claim to have seen Sarah in the halls. They say she leads them to the basement wall and points. I have reinforced the brickwork and added a second lock to the coal room door. What lies within must never be discovered. August 12th, 1886. Agnes has resigned. Good riddance. Her weakness was becoming a liability. I have hired Mrs. Dowd, who seems less susceptible to feminine hysteria and ghost stories. The final entry, dated the day before the confession letter, was written in a frantic, barely legible scrawl. April 11th, 1910. They are all here now. All 7 of them stand around my bed at night. Sarah leads them. I have barricaded my door, but it does no good. They pass through the wood as if it were air. Tonight Sarah spoke for the first time. She said, "Tomorrow we will be free." I fear I know what she means. God forgive me, though I deserve no mercy. 7 children, Emma whispered. He killed 7 children. The Bridgewater police station was housed in a modern brick building at the edge of town. Detective Marcus Reed, a stocky man with salt and pepper hair and tired eyes, listened skeptically as Emma, Walter, and Andrew explained their discovery. "So you're telling me," he said slowly, "that you found evidence that a reverend who ran the town orphanage in the 1880s murdered multiple children and hid their remains in a secret room?" "Yes," Emma replied, pushing the ledgers across his desk. "It's all documented here. His own confession, the ledgers recording the deaths, even a map showing where he concealed the bodies." Detective Reed flipped through the yellowed pages, his expression shifting from skepticism to concern. "Oh, this is disturbing. But even if it's true, we're talking about crimes committed over 140 years ago. Those children deserve justice," Emma insisted. "Their remains are still there, hidden in that basement. They've been trying to tell their story for generations." The detective arched an eyebrow. "They've been trying?" Walter cleared his throat. "What Emma means is that there have been persistent local legends about the orphanage being haunted. We believe these stories stem from the unresolved nature of these crimes." Detective Reed sighed. rubbing his forehead. Look, I'll submit these documents to our forensic team for authentication. If they're genuine, we'll consider investigating the site. But I have to be honest, this isn't going to be a priority case. There's a construction company scheduled to begin clearing that lot next month, Emma said. They'll destroy any evidence that remains. I'll see what I can do, Reed promised. But these things take time. As they left the police station, Emma felt a profound disappointment. She had hoped for immediate action, a team of officers rushing to excavate the orphanage basement. Finally bring in Sarah and the other children's remains into the light. They're not going to do anything, are they? She asked Walter as they stood in the parking lot. They might, Walter replied, though he sounded doubtful. But bureaucracy moves slowly. By the time they authenticate the documents and get approval for an excavation, the construction will have already begun, Emma finished. Those children will be buried under a new building, forgotten all over again. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She kept seeing Sarah's face in the photograph, the subtle pointing finger, the knowing smile that seemed to say, "I've been waiting for you." Around 2 a.m., she got up and spread all her research across her kitchen table. There had to be a way to compel the authorities to act quickly. As she reviewed her notes, a new thought occurred to her. She opened her laptop and began searching property records for Bridgewater. By dawn, she had her answer. The vacant lot where the orphanage had stood was currently owned by Morningside Development Corporation, Andrew Morningside's company. She called him as soon as it was a reasonable hour. "Andrew, it's Emma Harlow. I need to ask you something important. The orphanage property, you own it, don't you?" There was a pause before he answered. "Yes. My company purchased it last year as a potential development site. How did you know?" "Property records are public," she explained. "Andrew, the police aren't going to act quickly enough. Construction is scheduled to begin in a few weeks and any evidence will be destroyed. What are you suggesting? You can delay the construction. As the property owner, you have that power." Another pause. "I could, yes, but my investors wouldn't be happy. These children have waited for justice for over a century," Emma pressed. "Just give me a little time to find another way to investigate the site." By that afternoon, Emma had assembled an unlikely team. Walter had contacted Dr. Eliza Morgan, an archaeologist from Boston University who specialized in historical recovery. Margaret Simmons, despite her frailty, had insisted on being present to represent her grandmother. Andrew Morningside had not only agreed to delay construction, but had offered to fund a private excavation of the site. "My family has carried this burden without knowing what it was," he told Emma. "If my great-great-uncle did these terrible things, I want to help make it right." Detective Reed, impressed by their organization and the involvement of a respected academic, agreed to send an officer to observe and secure any evidence they might find. 3 days later, they gathered at the vacant lot. The chain-link fence had been removed, and Dr. Morgan's team had set up equipment around the area where the basement steps descended. According to the ground-penetrating radar, Dr. Morgan explained, pointing to a digital display, "There's definitely an enclosed space here that doesn't match the original building plans. The walls are thicker than the surrounding structure, almost as if they've been reinforced." Emma felt a chill despite the warm morning sun. She glanced at Margaret, who sat in her wheelchair under a portable canopy, her thin hands clasped tightly in her lap. "My grandmother always said there were secrets in those walls," the elderly woman murmured. "Now we'll finally know." The excavation proceeded methodically. The team cleared debris from the basement steps and forced open the rusted door. Beyond lay the remnants of the orphanage basement stone walls, blackened by the long-ago fire. Collapsed beams and decades of accumulated dirt and debris. Dr. Morgan consulted Reverend Thorne's hand-drawn map. "The special repository should be through here," she said, pointing to a section of wall that appeared more recent than the surrounding stonework. As the team began carefully removing bricks, Emma stood back, watching intently. The air felt heavy, charged with anticipation. Margaret had insisted on being brought down to witness the moment, her wheelchair positioned at a safe distance. "Do you feel it?" Margaret whispered to Emma. "They're here, watching us." Emma nodded. She had felt it since they entered the basement, a presence, or rather, multiple presences, observing silently from the shadows. A shout from one of the archaeologists drew their attention. A section of the wall had been removed, revealing a small, dark space beyond. "Doctor," Morgan approached with a powerful flashlight. "There's something here," she called, her voice tight with emotion. "Officer, you'd better come see this." The police officer who had been observing stepped forward. His face paled as he looked into the space. "We need to call this in," he said, reaching for his radio. "This is now officially a crime scene." Within hours, the vacant lot had been transformed. Police tape surrounded the property, and a forensic team had arrived. Detective Reed supervised as they carefully documented and removed the contents of the hidden room. Emma watched from behind the police line, her heart heavy. Dr. Morgan approached, her expression grim. "We've found human remains," she confirmed quietly. "Multiple individuals, all children based on the size. Exactly as the document suggested." "How many?" Emma asked. 7, just as Thorne recorded. They were buried beneath the floor of that small room. "We also found personal effects, clothing, toys, a few pieces of jewelry." Dr. Morgan hesitated. "One of the bodies was wearing the remnants of what appears to be a white dress. And there was this." She held up a plastic evidence bag containing a tarnished silver locket, identical to the one they had found in Thorne's trunk. "Sarah," Emma whispered. Detective Reed joined them, looking somber. "The medical examiner will need to conduct proper examinations, but preliminary assessment suggests these remains have been here since the late 1800s. Several show signs of trauma, consistent with abuse." He shook his head. "What kind of monster does this to children?" As the day progressed, news spread through Bridgewater. Residents gathered at the edge of the property, many laying flowers along the police tape. Local reporters arrived, eager to cover the sensational discovery. Emma stood apart from the crowd, watching as the forensic team continued their grim work. She felt a profound sadness, but also a sense of completion. Sarah Collins and the other children had waited so long for someone to hear their silent pleas. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the excavation site, Emma noticed something strange. Near the basement entrance, partially obscured by equipment, stood what appeared to be a small figure in white. Emma blinked and the figure was gone. Margaret Simmons, who had been watching from her wheelchair nearby, reached out and grasped Emma's hand. "She's saying thank you," the old woman said softly. "They all are." The following week passed in a blur of police interviews, media coverage, and forensic reports. Emma provided all her research to the authorities, including Hannah Simmons' journal and the contents of Reverend Thorne's trunk. The story had captured national attention, with headlines proclaiming historical horror. Orphanage director's century-old crimes uncovered. Emma sat in Detective Reed's office, reviewing the latest findings. The medical examiner had confirmed that all 7 sets of remains belonged to children between the ages of 8 and 12. Most showed evidence of physical abuse, and 2 had fractures consistent with blunt force trauma to the skull. "We've been able to identify them," Reed said, sliding a folder across his desk, "thanks to the orphanage records you provided and DNA comparison with descendants who've come forward." Emma opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were 7 photographs, each showing a solemn-faced child in period clothing, along with names and dates. Sarah Collins, age 10, 1874 to 1885, Thomas Wheeler. Age 9, 1873 to 1882, Mary Lambert. Age 11, 1869 to 1880, James Peterson. Age 8, 1874 to 1883, Elizabeth Crane. Age 12, 1870 to 1880, to William Davis. Age 9, 1872 to 1881, Grace Wilson. Age 10, 1873 to 1883. The dates matched Thorne's private ledger, Emma noted. He recorded each death as a disciplinary outcome or unfortunate expiration during correction. Reed nodded grimly. It seems he maintained 2 sets of records, the official orphanage documents, where these children were listed as transferred or adopted, and his private accounts of what really happened. "What will happen now?" Emma asked. "We're working with the Historical Society to arrange a proper burial for the remains. Several local churches have offered space in their cemeteries." Reed paused. "There's something else you should know. We found this among Sarah Collins' remains." He handed her another evidence bag containing a small, dirt-encrusted object. It was a child's drawing on a scrap of yellowed paper, somehow preserved all these years. The crude pencil sketch showed a tall figure with an angry face standing over several small figures. One of the small figures was pointing to what appeared to be a wall. "She was trying to tell someone," Emma whispered. "Even before she died, it seems so," Reed agreed. According to Thorne's records, Sarah was punished for spreading lies about children who had supposedly been adopted. We now believe she had witnessed or discovered what happened to the others and was trying to expose him, and he killed her to keep her quiet, Emma concluded. But she found another way to tell her story. The next day, Emma visited Margaret Simmons at Oakwood Assisted Living. The elderly woman appeared frailer than ever, but her eyes were bright with purpose. "I've been thinking about my grandmother," Margaret said as Emma settled into the chair beside her. All those years she carried the burden of what she suspected but couldn't prove. She would be at peace now, knowing the truth has finally come out. "Your grandmother's journal was crucial," Emma told her. "Without her observations, we might never have connected all the pieces." Margaret smiled faintly. "Hannah always said the dead don't rest until their stories are told. I think these children can rest now." A week later, Bridgewater held a memorial service for the 7 orphans. The entire town seemed to attend, gathering in the cemetery where 7 small headstones had been erected in a semicircle. Each stone bore a name, dates, and the inscription, "Finally at peace." Emma stood at the edge of the crowd, watching as white roses were placed on each grave. The autumn sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled light across the newly turned earth. Walter joined her, his expression solemn. "The Historical Society is creating a permanent exhibit about the orphanage and what happened there. We want to ensure these children are remembered." "What about the photograph?" Emma asked. "The one with Sarah appearing after her death." "It will be the centerpiece," Walter replied, "along with the full story of how you discovered the truth." As the ceremony concluded and people began to disperse, Emma lingered by the graves. The police investigation had confirmed everything they had suspected. Reverend William Thorne had systematically abused children in his care for years, killing at least 7 of them and concealing their remains. His wife Eleanor had either been complicit or had discovered the truth shortly before her own death. The fire that ultimately claimed Thorne's life had indeed been deliberately set legally by Thorne himself, as his confession suggested, driven by guilt and fear of the spirits that haunted him. Standing there among the fresh graves, Emma thought about Sarah Collins, the girl in the white dress who had appeared in a photograph taken after her death. Had her spirit truly lingered all these years trying to lead someone to the truth? Or was the photograph simply an unexplainable anomaly, a double exposure or darkroom error that had coincidentally sparked Emma's investigation? As a historian, Emma wanted to believe in the rational explanation, but in her heart, she knew what she had seen: the figure in white at the excavation site, the whispers in the basement stairwell, the chill that had accompanied her discoveries. Sarah had found a way to tell her story, reaching across time to those who would listen. Emma placed her own white rose on Sarah's grave. "Rest now," she whispered. "Your story has been told." As she turned to leave, a flash of white caught her eye near a stand of trees at the cemetery's edge. For just a moment, she glimpsed a small figure in a white dress, not sad or pleading now, but smiling peacefully. Emma blinked, and the figure was gone, leaving only dappled sunlight dancing through the autumn leaves. 3 months later, Emma stood in the newly renovated exhibition hall of the Bridgewater Historical Society. The walls were lined with photographs, documents, and artifacts telling the story of the Bridgewater Children's Home and the 7 forgotten children who had finally received justice. "It's quite remarkable," said Professor Daniel Harris, a historian from Harvard who had come to preview the exhibition before its public opening. "You've turned a tragic historical footnote into a compelling narrative about institutional abuse and the importance of listening to children's voices." Emma nodded, leading him through the carefully arranged displays. "That was our intention. Walter and I wanted to honor these children by ensuring their stories weren't sensationalized or reduced to a local ghost tale." The centerpiece of the exhibition was a glass case containing the original orphanage. Photographs showing the 12 children, including Sarah Collins, the girl who shouldn't have been there. Beside it was a touchscreen display allowing visitors to learn about each child's life before the orphanage. Based on painstaking research Emma had conducted through census records, newspaper archives, and family histories. Sarah Collins was the daughter of factory workers in Boston, Emma explained. Both parents died in an industrial accident in 1883. She had been described as bright and inquisitive by her previous school. The other children came from similarly tragic circumstances: poverty, disease, abandonment, and they found no safety in what should have been their refuge, Professor Harris observed solemnly. The exhibition continued with sections detailing the investigation and excavation, including a scale model of the orphanage basement showing the hidden room where the remains had been found. Video interviews with forensic experts and archaeologists explained how the children's cause of death had been determined. The final section was dedicated to the memorial and legacy. Photographs of the cemetery where the children were now properly buried. Information about the scholarship fund established in their names for modern-day orphan children. And a guest book where visitors could leave messages of remembrance. "We've also included information about recognizing and reporting child abuse," Emma said. "We wanted this exhibition to not only commemorate these particular children, but to remind people that institutional abuse still happens today." After Professor Harris departed, Emma walked through the quiet exhibition space alone. In 2 days it would open to the public, but for now, she had time to reflect on the journey that had brought her here. When she had first discovered the anomalous photograph 3 months ago, she could never have imagined where it would lead. The investigation had become national news, sparking discussions about historical accountability and the treatment of vulnerable children. Several other orphanages and children's homes from the same era were now being researched for similar patterns of abuse and unexplained disappearances. Emma paused before a wall dedicated to Hannah Simmons and other staff members who had suspected wrongdoing but lacked the power or evidence to take action. Margaret had provided family photographs and additional diary entries for this section before her peaceful passing just a month earlier. "She'll know the truth now," Margaret had said during their final visit, "and she'll be with those children, telling them they weren't forgotten." As Emma completed her circuit of the exhibition, she found Walter arranging brochures near the entrance. "Everything ready for the opening?" he asked. "Just about," Emma replied. Professor Harris was impressed. "He thinks we should consider publishing an academic paper about the investigation methodology." Walter nodded approvingly. "You should. It was remarkable detective work, connecting all those historical threads." He hesitated. "Have you decided whether to include your own experiences in the official narrative?" Emma knew what he meant. Throughout the investigation and excavation, she had experienced things that defied rational explanation: glimpses of a girl in white, whispered voices, the sense of being watched by invisible presences. She had kept these experiences mostly to herself, mentioning them only to Walter and Margaret. "No," she said finally. "Those moments were ... personal. I'm still not sure what I experienced, and it doesn't matter for the historical record. What matters is that these children's remains were found and their stories told." Later that evening, as Emma was preparing to leave, she made one final check of the exhibition space. The security system was set, the temperature and humidity controls for the artifacts properly calibrated. As she turned off the main lights, leaving only the soft illumination of the display cases, she paused before the orphanage photograph. Sarah Collins looked back at her from across time, that same enigmatic smile on her face. But now Emma understood what that smile meant. It wasn't knowing or mysterious, it was hopeful. Even in death, Sarah had maintained hope that someday someone would see her and understand. "Goodbye, Sarah," Emma whispered. "Rest in peace." As she locked the exhibition hall behind her, Emma felt a profound sense of completion. The 12 children in the photograph, 11 living and 1 dead, had finally been accounted for. The official records now matched the truth. Outside, the winter evening was clear and cold, stars visible above the small town. Emma breathed deeply, feeling as though a weight had been lifted. She had come to Bridgewater seeking a temporary refuge from her own troubles, and had instead found purpose in giving voice to those long silenced. As she walked to her car, a flicker of movement caught her eye, a small figure at the edge of the Historical Society's garden. For just a moment, Emma thought she saw a girl in a white dress, smiling and waving goodbye. Then the figure was gone, leaving only empty space and the gentle whisper of wind through bare branches. Emma smiled to herself. Whether Sarah's spirit had truly guided her investigation, or whether her own historian's instinct had connected the dots, the outcome was the same. Justice, long delayed, had finally been served, and somewhere, perhaps, 12 children were at peace. 1 year later, Emma Harlow stood at a podium in the Bridgewater Town Hall, addressing a room full of community members, journalists, and academics. Behind her, a projection screen displayed the now famous Orphanage photograph. "Today marks the anniversary of the Bridgewater 7 Memorial," she began. "In the past year, over 15,000 visitors have come to our small town to learn about these children and the historical investigation that brought their stories to light. The exhibition at the Historical Society had exceeded all expectations, drawing visitors from across the country. It had been featured in national newspapers and academic journals, praised for its sensitive handling of difficult subject matter and its situational approach to institutional abuse. What began as an anomaly in a photograph of a 12th child who shouldn't have been there led to the discovery of a century-old crime," Emma continued. "But more importantly, it led to remembrance and healing. The audience included descendants of the 7 children who had been identified, many of whom had contributed family stories and artifacts to expand the exhibition. They wore small white rose pins, symbolizing their connection to the memorial. The Bridgewater 7 Scholarship has now provided educational funding for 15 children in foster care," Emma announced. "And our partnership with child protection agencies has resulted in new training programs for identifying and preventing institutional abuse." After the formal presentation, Emma mingled with attendees at the reception. A young woman approached, introducing herself as Jessica Collins. "My great-great-grandmother was Sarah's cousin," she explained. "Our family always had stories about Sarah, how she disappeared from the orphanage under mysterious circumstances. For generations we tried to find out what happened to her. I'm glad we could finally provide those answers," Emma replied. Jessica hesitated. "There's something else. A family story passed down through generations." She lowered her voice. "They said Sarah always appeared in family photographs after her disappearance. A small figure in the background that no one remembered being there when the picture was taken. We thought it was just a family legend until we saw your exhibition." Emma felt a familiar chill. Do you still have any of those photographs? Just one. It's from 1920, a Collins family reunion. Jessica showed Emma a photo on her phone. A large group of people posed outside a farmhouse. In the background, barely visible near a tree, was a small figure in a white dress. She was watching over her family, Emma murmured. Later that evening, Emma visited the cemetery where the 7 children were buried. The simple headstones had weathered their first year, beginning to look like they belonged among the older graves. Fresh flowers indicated regular visitors. The town had embraced these children as their own. Emma had moved permanently to Bridgewater, accepting a full-time position as head archivist at the Historical Society. Her work had expanded to include documenting other overlooked historical injustices, giving voice to those who had been silenced by power and privilege. As she placed white roses on each grave, Emma reflected on how the discovery had changed her. Before finding the orphanage photograph, she had been adrift, seeking refuge from personal disappointments. Now she had found purpose in connecting past and present, ensuring that forgotten stories were told. The sun was setting as Emma finished her quiet ritual. As she turned to leave, she noticed a small, fresh carving at the base of Sarah's headstone that hadn't been there during her last visit. It was simple but unmistakable, a small hand pointing downward, just as Sarah had pointed in the photograph. Emma smiled, reaching out to touch the carving gently. "You can rest now," she whispered. "Your work is done." Walking back through the cemetery as twilight deepened, Emma heard the distant laughter of children playing in the park across the street. For a moment it seemed to her that there might have been an extra voice among them, the happy sound of a child finally free. The 12 children in the photograph had all been accounted for at last, 11 living, 1 dead, but all remembered. The official records now matched the truth, just as Sarah had tried to ensure all those years ago. Emma glanced back once more at the 7 graves, now peaceful silhouettes against the darkening sky. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying what might have been a final farewell. "Goodbye," Emma said softly, and somewhere perhaps a girl in a white dress smiled and finally turned away. Her long vigil ended, her story complete.